My grandpa was an odd guy. He was clearly wealthy, but no one was ever sure how. He lived frugally in a small house on 1/4 of an acre, with a sensible car and nothing too fancy in the house. If you'd driven past it, you would have assumed that some old-timer on a pension was just moldering away his golden years there. And you'd have been right, in some ways. Where he showed his wealth was in his generosity. Grandpa liked to give. He gave the best Christmas presents. He had the best candy for Halloween, donated to charities, and liked to see people happy. If you asked him how he could afford to be so generous, however, he would always just wink and say he had his ways. Not even my grandmother knew where his money came from, and they were married for 50 years. So when he died, we all wondered who would inherit his mysterious fortune. My cousins had loved Grandpa. Grandkids always do, but the two of us had always been close. My old man hadn't even waited till I was born to go grab some milk and cigarettes, and Grandma and Grandpa had helped my mom raise me so she could go to work. I have a lot of fond memories of sitting with Grandpa and watching TV, taking walks around the neighborhood, and eating ice cream at this little shop on the corner. He would always tell me to appreciate the little things, because the smallest things could be the ones that changed your life forever. "Take this," he would say, showing me the door knocker that he often carried in his pocket. "I found this when I was young, sifting through trash in a landfill as I looked for bottles to sell. It became my lucky charm, and it changed my life forever." Grandpa carried that door knocker for as long as I had known him, and it was pretty unique. It was a brass hand holding an apple, and it was all meticulously crafted in exhausting detail. The fingers had individual nails, the apple had a stem and leaves, and even the knuckles had wrinkles on them that had been carefully worked. I couldn't believe as a young child that Grandpa had just pulled this out of a dump, but he carried it everywhere, and I suppose it did bring him luck. The funeral was beautiful, everyone there having nothing but kind words for Grandpa and his family. After the service, my 3 cousins and I were asked to come to a will reading at the lawyer's office, and Grandpa had been as generous in death as he was in life. My cousins had received a trust fund for each of them, the amount payable on their 30th birthday, with a small living expense each month. Grandpa hadn't left a trust for me, but he had left me his little house, which I was pretty glad for. Mom had recently married, and though I liked Mike a lot, it had seemed a little odd to have her adult son living in the house that she was trying to make a new life in. Grandpa's old house was the perfect size for me, a college student with no real prospects of marriage in the near future. It was close enough to campus that I thought it would be ideal, but the lawyer had one more thing to give me. "Your grandfather was also very clear that I give you this," he said, and he handed me Grandpa's lucky charm, the brass door knocker. I thanked him, thinking I might hang it somewhere in the house in Grandpa's memory. It seemed only fitting to make a little memorial wall out of it. After all, Grandpa had loved the thing, and it had been his only constant possession for years. So I moved in that day, taking my things and wishing my mom and stepdad goodbye as I too embarked on a new life. Over the next few days, I changed the house around a little. I hung my flat screen on the wall, I moved Grandpa's favorite armchair around, I added my books to his bookshelf, and I donated his clothes and some of his other things to one of his favorite charities. I think Grandpa would have liked the thought that his stuff would help people in need, and they were very thankful. A few of them offered condolences, having read about his death in the paper. Grandpa bought a lot of his stuff from Goodwill and Habitat for Humanity, but he also donated a lot, so he was well known to them. It was Friday, about 4 days after the funeral, when I noticed the knocker on the counter and remembered my plan to hang it and make a memorial wall. I didn't have anything else planned for that day, so seemed like a fine pursuit. I hung the knocker in the living room, putting it above the little shelf where I put some candles and a picture of Granddad. I put his wallet up there too, something else he was never without, and I added a tin of Altoids, a pocket watch I'd seen him wear, and a few other pictures of him. The door knocker was the centerpiece, and it all looked very nice when I was done. As I finished, I stepped back and admired it, thinking that Grandpa would have liked it too. That night was the first time I heard the knocking. I was lying in bed, doing some doom scrolling before I went to sleep, when suddenly I heard a loud thump from the living room. I took out my earbuds and listened, wondering if something had fallen over or maybe someone was at the door. But I didn't hear anything. I shrugged, thinking it had been my imagination, but just before I could slip the earbud back in, I heard it again. 3 long booms from the living room, then silence. I got up, wondering who could be knocking at my door at this time of night, and went to the front door and looked out the peephole. I opened the door to see if someone was joking around, but there was no one there. Front porch was empty. Grandpa didn't have any bushes or anything to hide behind. The kid, or whoever, would have had to been the freaking Flash to make it off the porch without being seen, and I closed the door and started to go back to bed. I'd come to the hallway that led there when I heard it again. 3 long booms, then silence. I turned back, looking at the door, but there was nothing. The knocking hadn't come from the door. I would have been able to tell. No, it had come from the living room. I glanced around, looking for someone at the window, or maybe the rattle of a woodpecker on the eaves, but there was nothing. I decided to go back to bed and try to make sense of it later, but that wasn't the last time I heard it. I heard the knocking a couple of times over the weekend, but I could never quite nail down where it was coming from. It was always either 1, 2, or 3 knocks, followed by a 10-second pause, and then the same number of knocks before it stopped. By Monday, I was pulling my hair out, wondering if this was the pipes or something in the walls. Then I finally caught it. I'd found a wedding picture of my grandparents sitting in a desk, something Grandpa had probably put away so he wouldn't miss Grandma too much, and I decided it would look very nice on the shelf with the other memories. I was adding the wedding picture beside one of Grandpa accepting an award for philanthropy when the knocking on the wall suddenly rattled and thumped. I jumped back, not sure what to make of it, but it thumped once, twice, 3 times, and was quiet for about 10 seconds. I had just thought it might be a fluke or something. Then it did it again. Thump, thump, thump. Then silence. I took it off the wall and looked for some kind of motor or something, but it's just a normal brass knocker. It happened 2 more times that day, and I was extremely curious as to what made it do it and why. I started going through Grandpa's desk, hoping for some explanation, and that's when I found the letter. It was in the middle of a ledger book, addressed to me, and it wasn't even sealed, which was unlike Grandpa. It was just a single page of notebook paper, and I was glad to see Grandpa's cramped handwriting speaking to me from the page. I hope you're enjoying the house, and I hope you found this letter in a timely manner. I'd considered leaving it to Wilson to give to you, but I thought it might be better if you came across it naturally. Also, I wanted you to receive the knocker, and Wilson may have decided to keep it if he read the letter. He's a good man, an honest man, but greed can do funny things to people. You've probably noticed by now that the door knocker taps on its own sometimes. You wouldn't believe how I discovered its power, a complete accident, but I swear that what I'm about to tell you is absolutely true. The door knocker opens to different places. Place it on a door and wait for the knocks. Once it knocks, open the door and travel to where it takes you. The knocker only has 3 destinations, but they have been of great benefit to me and our family. When it knocks, you'll have 10 seconds to open the door. The second set of knocks is the door closing, so it won't work if you catch it on the second set. One knock opens onto the treasury, a room of treasures. Coins, gems, gold, all piled to the ceiling. If anything guards it, it has never bothered me, but I'm always careful not to take too much. Two knocks opens onto the library, a room stuffed with bookshelves. You can spend hours, days even in this place, and time won't pass outside the door. I've learned so many things here, things lost to time, and read about things that have yet to happen. Three knocks opens onto a void, a darkness that I dare not enter. Anything you put in here will be gone. Anything. There's no ground outside it though, so don't walk in. I'm ashamed to say that it's where I've been putting my trash, but it's also where I hid your dog, the one I said that ran away when you were young. He died suddenly, just lay over and died, and I put him in there before you woke up from your nap. I'm sorry I never told you, but you were so young when it happened that I didn't think you would mourn him for long. The knocks were never consistent, but each knock seems to come at least once a day. The three knocks usually come in the evening or the early afternoon. One knock is usually in the morning or before noon, and the two knocks come when it will. While you're inside, don't let the door close. I was stuck in the library for a long, long time once, and was fortunate that your uncle came along and opened the door. Time doesn't affect people the same way inside the door as it does out here, so spend as much time as you want there. If you get hurt, however, you'll be injured, so be careful. You and I have always been close, and I know that you and your cousins have speculated for years about my mysterious fortune. The knocker is yours to do with what you will, but always remember that money breeds difficulty, which is why I have always kept it a secret. Good luck. I love you, kiddo. I read through the note a few times, trying to make sense of it. There was no way. Grandpa had always been sharp, no real problems mentally, but this sounded like the ramblings of a madman or a lunatic. The knocker, however, had moved on its own, that much was true. It occurred to me that there was a way to test the rest of it, so I decided to do just that. I took the knocker off the wall where I had hung it and attached it to the closet door in the living room. It looked a little silly there, a door knocker on a door that opened onto a closet with two coats and a bunch of board games in it, but I wanted to be sure. It was silly, the kind of thing you read about in fairy tales, but I wanted to be sure. I had a while to wait, but it finally happened, just as I was thinking about going to bed. It was around 10:30, and I reached for the remote to turn the TV off when I heard it. Two loud knocks, seconds apart, on the closet door. I popped up, remembering I had 10 seconds to get there, and threw the door open. I expected to find the same closet that had been there earlier. I expected this to be a joke from my grandfather. But I didn't expect to find the great library that he had talked about on the other side. It was huge, a library to rival any I'd ever seen, and the windows shone with perfect sunlight as I stood in shock. The shelves were tall, taller than the roof of the house I stood in, and they had long trestled ladders with wheels to slide along the floor. I could see a grand staircase, and I felt sure that there would be levels above the next as well. I could learn anything in there. I could learn everything in there. But I remembered what Grandpa had said about not getting closed inside, and I looked for something to prop the door open with. I saw an end table and pulled it over to put in the way, stepping inside and marveling at the space. I spent hours perusing books. There were books on languages, on history, on science, on anything I would want to know. I only explored the first floor that night, but There was enough there to keep me reading for days, maybe months. I was studying architecture at college, and there was a whole section of books I could use to study any period, any style, and anything else I wanted. This place was like the libraries they talked about in Alexandria, the libraries and the Harry Potter books, and some kind of wizard's private collection from a fantasy novel, all rolled into one. Time may have moved differently here, but it didn't stop me from getting tired. I'd been excited when I came in, but after a couple of hours, I was yawning and rubbing my eyes. I decided to come back another time and let the door close as I pushed the end table out of the way. It was true. I couldn't believe it, but I had seen it myself. Grandpa had a magic door knocker. I spent the next few days testing each knock pattern, and Grandpa's observations had been spot on. I found the room with the gold in it the next day, and it was almost more impressive than the library. Think of a room full of any kind of money you could want. Gold bars, U.S. currency, ancient denarii, little stones with things scratched on them, gems, pearls, silver nuggets, and other things I didn't even have a name for. I reached for a stack of hundreds with a shaky hand and brought them out before I let the door close again. I had made about $2,000 in a matter of seconds, and I put it somewhere safe before heading to class. The void was a little scarier when I got to it, but I'd been setting garbage bags beside the door just in case, and I was home when the knocks finally came. The void was just what it claimed to be. It was like looking out at a night sky, except there was no stars. It was an inky, unnatural blackness, and I wondered if maybe Nietzsche had been describing this place when he talked about staring into the abyss. The space was utterly devoid of anything, but it seemed to crouch as well, just waiting for me to drop my guard. The bags went in, falling into a soundless, airless void before I closed the door again. It was great for a while, truly a blessing. I had all the money I needed, and whatever I took seemed to come back after I shut the door. I could take books from the library if I needed to, and anything I left on the work tables would put itself away on the shelf. I spent a lot of time in the library when I got there, and sometimes I would wake up to find that I'd fallen asleep. The door never slammed shut and trapped me in there, and without anyone to come behind me and accidentally close it, I felt safe in there. I learned so much in a relatively short time, and my professors were impressed with my knowledge. I considered bringing them the books I'd used to gain that knowledge, but I thought better of it. How would I explain it to them? A guy in his early 20s who just happened to have a book that was probably hundreds of years old. It was something that would probably gain the attention of the wrong sort of people. I was careful not to use too much of the money, not to spread it around too much, and careful not to show anyone the books I got from the library. It went well for about 4 months, but then I started getting knocks of another sort from the door. It started subtly, with little knocks and taps from time to time. I'm sure I missed a lot of them, but I would sometimes look up as I was watching TV or reading, expecting to see the knocker tapping, but finding it silent. I started watching the door closer, getting strange lights wafting beneath it sometimes. They would skitter across the bottom like strange shadows, and I found myself watching them more than the TV after a while. My trips to the other places were still uneventful, the landscapes the same as they had always been, but it was the time in between the knocks that I came to dread. Then one night, something knocked back. I was brushing my teeth when I heard a familiar boom sound 3 times. I checked the clock and saw it was nearly 11. A little late for knocking, but I stuck my head out to look at the door nonetheless. The toothbrush was still in my mouth, and I had expected to see nothing stranger than the knocker fall back into place. Instead, something knocked again, and it wasn't the knocker. I came slowly out of the bathroom, watching as strange lights came flashing from beneath the cracks of the door. It was like a haunted house attraction, and I almost expected to see smoke billowing out from underneath it. The knocks were shy, almost uncertain, and I was preparing to head to my room when something hit the door hard enough to shake it in the frame. I jumped back, not sure what to make of it, and when it hit again, I fell onto my butt and just watched it shake. Whatever was knocking was adamant about getting in, and it slammed its weight into the door again and again. The knob rattled and shook. The lights flashed faster and angrier. My teeth were chattering. This had never happened before, and I was terrified that whatever it was might get through. It slammed into it again, the old wood cracking in the frame. And when it struck this time, I saw something break through the surface and come grabbing blindly from within. It was an arm, a long purple arm covered in scales. It thrashed around trying to find something to grab, and the sounds from within were like bats and birds turned up to 1,000. It shivered right on the edge of hearing, and I expected my ears to start bleeding. It was looking for the knob, and I wasn't sure what would happen if it found it. Instead, it bumped into the knocker. It fell off the door. It was only held on by a couple of screws, and as it clattered onto the floor, the most hellish sound of all ripped through the hole before cutting off as suddenly as it had begun. The lights, the noise, and the banging all stopped with a suddenness that made me dizzy. I stood up, looking at the broken door, and walked slowly into the living room to see the extent of the damage. Something was bumping, but I thought maybe the arm had knocked something over. I wanted to make sure the knocker was okay, but as I came around Grandpa's old chair, I saw what was making all the noise. It was the arm that had come through the door. It was leaking black fluid all over the hardwood and flopping around like a fish. It didn't flop for long, but now I'm left with a problem. The portal only seems to open when the knocker is up, but unless it's up, I can't open it. I wonder if this is why Grandpa kept it with him so often. Did he perhaps have a visitor one night when he least expected it? For now, I'm keeping the knocker in my bedside table, but even as I lay here writing this, I can hear it bumping against the wood every now and again. The money will eventually run out. That or my curiosity will get the better of me, and I'll hang the knocker again. But I think for now, I'll let it sit. No need to invite trouble if I don't have to. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. I'm glad you made it to the end of the story. Thanks for stopping by. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, well, there should be some links popping up at the end of this to other great stories, maybe even some great playlists that you can discover. We update 7 nights a week, so there's always something new and something spooky waiting for you on the channel. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, there should be some links to Amazon down in my description, so go have a look over there. It should get you to all my latest books. Speaking of books, I've got my first horror novel, Towsy Homestead, available for purchase on Amazon. It's my first horror novel, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd go give it a look and maybe give it a buy too. If you'd like to support the channel, we have a subscription program here on YouTube, but we've also got a Patreon with lots of tiers and lots of different rewards. For example, our Spooky Skeleton contributors get their spooky 12 hours early. That's right, they get their videos at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. Ghostly Reader tier contributors, that's a tier that's only available on Patreon, I'm afraid, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep, hopefully in a timely manner. So, however you support the channel, whether it's monetarily or by enjoying our great videos here, thank you so much. Speaking of patrons, before we go, let's go ahead and thank them. Thanks to Sara, Unicorn Hollow, JustAmy, and Cinnamon Fox for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Shannon, McGhee, Janet, Lee Kendall, Ronda J, Sue Casper, Valinar, CleoHarperReturns, Sara, and Queen Sheebah for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, Queen Sheebah, MissNewBooty, and Alex Connor for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.